Hi everybody, this is HDE. The channel recently went past the point of gaining 700 subscribers, which blows my mind. So I figured that what I would do is, as is the tradition with these kind of things, I'd throw things open to another Q&A session over on Twitter. Some of you have been kind enough to send questions in because you evidently care what I think about things or something crazy like that. So I figured I'd better get around to actually answering them. Sorry for keeping people waiting so long for this, I've just been really busy. But let's crack on and see what some of you guys have been asking me. The first question comes from Dan at OddPod, who asks, "What's the very first movie you remember watching?" That is a tough question to answer because although I kind of pride myself on having a very good memory, going back, thinking back as far as my early childhood, which would be when I was sat down in front of movies, I really struggle to remember anything with a great deal of clarity. I've got a feeling that the first movie, or certainly the first movie I have any kind of clear recollection of watching, that would have been when I was taken to an all-day screening of Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. My mother took me to a cinema to see both those films back to back with a break in the middle. And I don't remember a great deal about the actual movies from actually sitting down and watching them that time. I've got to know them much better ever since, obviously. But I do vividly remember being sat in the cinema and being absolutely entranced by these films. I'm not actually much of a Star Wars fan these days. It's actually grown into something that I actively dislike. But when I was a kid, it was absolutely magical. And I do remember being absolutely just captivated by these films as they were on. And bearing in mind that I would only have been about maybe, 7 or 8 at the time, that's quite a long time to ask a young child to sit still in a cinema. But I do remember sitting there in the seat and just munching on my sweets and drinking my drink and being alternately blown away by what was on the screen and absolutely terrified because I was quite a fearful little kid. But it was probably that. Someone will probably come out and tell me something different now, but that's what I remember. Second question comes from Beta Pulse, who asks, "Why is the D lowercase?" That's a really good question. Something I've been waiting for somebody to ask for a long time because that lowercase d in HDE is actually 100% intentional, and not very many people pick up on it. It's actually my cheeky little reference to a film that I saw years and years ago that I've always loved, which is a Steve Martin movie called LA Story. And that film is a very broad kind of satire of the whole Hollywood industry, the whole Hollywood scene, showbiz in the States, whatever you want to call it. And it's very, very funny. I really recommend that anybody who likes decent films and likes to have a good laugh at a movie goes out and finds that film as soon as possible because it's brilliant. But what that has to do with the lowercase d in HDE is that one of the characters in the movie, played by Sarah Jessica Parker, her name is Sandy, and there's something funny going on with the way her name's spelled. She's kind of portrayed as being your stereotypical Hollywood airhead, basically, and the name Sandy is spelled, I think, with 2 E's, and she makes a point of making sure people know that one of those E's is supposed to be uppercase, and that just always tickled me. It's the kind of very, very gentle, small, nothing kind of joke that just amuses me greatly. And around about the time when I started working in comics and I decided I was going to do it under a pseudonym, there's a whole long, boring, not even remotely entertaining story about why I went with HDE. But that thing with the lowercase d that's 100% intentionally referencing that joke from that movie because I've always found it very amusing. Dudley of Yestazine asks, "What's your favourite game bundled with a Spectrum Plus 2? That's the kind of question I absolutely dread being asked because I never owned a ZX Spectrum Plus 2. I was a ZX Spectrum kid. My parents actually bought me a ZX Spectrum Plus. But I actually had to research, what games were bundled with the Spectrum Plus 2 just to be able to give any kind of answer to this. I was thinking like maybe I would have played one of them, on the Spectrum Plus, after the fact, and I'd be able to give an answer. But I can't, because the only games that I'm familiar with, that I know anything about from the Spectrum Plus 2 bundle, were the ones in the James Bond 007 action pack. And not being a big James Bond fan ever in my lifetime, I just never played them. So I haven't really got an answer for that one. I can give you a bit of a cop-out answer if you like, though, because like I say, I did own a ZX Spectrum as a kid, and I do remember that there were some games bundled with that, and of the ones that came with it, I think the one that I spent the most time with and had the most fun with was a Scion game called Planetoids, which was just basically a straight clone of Asteroids for the ZX Spectrum, and I remember it being quite good. I remember playing that, hunched over the Spectrum with the keyboard controls and having a bit of a struggle with them, but that game was good enough fun, I think, to keep me entertained as a kid. And I might have to dig that out again. Let's see if I can get hold of it somehow. Now that I've got a ZX Spectrum next, might be fun to revisit that and see how it fares. James O'Grady, also known as What Ho Snorkers, asks, as you've grown, do you think the comments section is worth the hassle of having it? And have you seen it change with your growth? That is a really good question, and I'm going to stick my neck out and say that of all the questions that anyone sent in for this Q&A, this one's my favourite, because there's some real meat I can sink my teeth into here. I would say that the whole business of the comment section on YouTube is kind of, it's a tricky one to gauge, and my thoughts on it are quite complex, because I sort of come at it from a point of view thinking about what my comment section means to me. I also try to acknowledge where I am as a creator, because I am a very small channel, and really I've got thoughts about how creators engage with their fans and vice versa, and the comment section really plays into all of that. I'm going to say that the comment section is worthwhile, and it's a very good way of basically engaging with your community as it grows around your content. And to dismiss it, I think, is not really a very good idea for any creator. That said, I will say that I'm not really a fan of this idea that some people have, that creators should just be open to anything that people feel to them and should just take whatever's flung at them, because some people can be extremely disrespectful and very rude. Now, I operate a very strict comment policy on my channel, which is to say that if somebody posts something that I feel is unpleasant or it's designed to upset somebody, either myself or somebody else in my comments, I'm just not letting that through moderation. Everything that gets posted under my videos gets held for approval, and until such time as viewers demonstrate to me that they can be trusted to be decent and reasonable and friendly with other people, then I'm just going to sort of vet everything that comes through. If anybody posts something that I personally don't like, that rubs me the wrong way, I'm not going to allow that to be publicly viewable. And the reason I say that is because I'm very much of the opinion that not everybody who has something to say on the internet is worth listening to. Now, sure, some people have got some ideas or opinions that are maybe a bit silly or ill-considered, and I don't really have a problem with those. But sometimes you run into these people whose entire online persona is that they just want to be unpleasant. They just want to be difficult. They want to presume to lecture people who have taken time to create content on things that they feel they've got wrong, or things that they've said that they really don't like and have some kind of bizarre problem with. I am not interested in reading that. I don't generally bother reading comment sections on other people's videos unless they're over a topic or something that I personally really am interested in. I'm not really interested in seeing my own comment section clogged up with things that are unpleasant, that are just not fun to read. So I do police my own comment section. I'm not a fan of censorship. I don't want to gag people, if they're saying things that may just be, I don't know, maybe a little uncomfortable as opposed to outright nasty. But I do pay attention to what people post under my videos, and if things are just unpleasant and nasty, I'm just not going to let them through. That said, it doesn't really happen very often. With regard to the question of whether I've seen a change in the way my comments section works as my channel's slowly grown, well, not really. There has been a slight change that's maybe worth mentioning, in that the kind of comments that I get now that I'm uploading gaming content as opposed to anime a few years ago, the tone is very much different. I'm not going to say that anime fans are, a less pleasant bunch than the gaming crowd, because that would be silly and it would be wrong. But I did find that with anime having a much younger fan base, I used to get a lot of comments that were kind of, I don't know really how to explain it, young in their reasoning, maybe. Sometimes these would be quite unpleasant, and I think there are probably more comments that I've deleted under anime videos than anything else I've ever done. Those would sometimes take the form of comments where people were trying to lecture me on things that they were of the opinion that I'd got wrong in those videos, or they were maybe trying to aggressively defend a different opinion to that kind of thing, and that just turns me off. If there's a goof in one of those old videos, and I'll hold my hand up and say that there are a few, mostly as a result of the information that I found in my research being inaccurate, then, there's a better way to tell somebody that something is incorrect than to fling bile at them. As soon as somebody starts to do that to me, I'm not interested. If you want to give criticism to people, the best way to do it is to be polite about it. Being rude to people, automatically, it sets you up to be ignored, and that's a lesson that people do need to learn. Every once in a while, and this was very, very rare that this would happen, I would get somebody would come up and they would thumb their nose at me and they would fling some acid at me, and it was very obviously done in a way that was designed to upset me or whatever. I got no time for that. I'm just going to zap that comment and go and do something else, because life is too short, I'm too busy. And to be perfectly honest, if people have got a really serious problem with something I've said in one of my videos, given how much effort I know goes into how they're scripted and worded and how carefully I check a lot of things, I don't care. Next question comes from Lord Arse, who asks, if you were given the opportunity to have the power of flight, but it meant that every written word appeared to you in Comic Sans, would you take it? Somebody's been paying attention. It's almost as if you know that I letter comics for a living. Flight or everything I read being rendered in Comic Sans? Flight, Comic Sans. Flight, Comic Sans. Gotta say, if you offered me this as a trade-off, I would turn down the ability to fly everywhere. And that's a really easy decision to make, because flying doesn't agree with me. Getting on a bus doesn't agree with me. Driving in a car doesn't agree with me. Being on any kind of public transport or going places very fast. I'm borderline agoraphobic, and those kind of things are my triggers. Comic Sans, on the other hand, is an absolute monstrosity of a typeface, and nobody should ever use it for anything, ever. I actually had one year in comics where half of my workload consisted of books that came to me to be relettered, because whoever had handled them previously had done so with Comic Sans or other fonts that just weren't fit for the task. And it seems like a crazy thing to the uninitiated, but trust me, publishers actually care about this kind of thing, and the ones that don't last very long. People like to be able to read the books that they've got in their hands. So yeah, not keen on flying. Being able to read without bleeding from the eyes, yeah, very much a fan of the latter. Shane Battams, also known as Steadysphere, asks, what's your favourite game you've covered so far, and why? Also, what do you think of the surging trend of mini consoles? I really had to think about this one. It's really, really tricky, because if you ask me what my favourite games are, usually I can think, oh yeah, I like this, and this. But then if you ask me what my favourite games are of the ones that I've reviewed, well, that's comparatively a very small number. I had a really hard time whittling this down. At first I was thinking maybe Assault Suit Lanos for the PlayStation 4, because it's such a good recreation and reimagining of the old Sega Mega Drive game. And then I was thinking that maybe I liked Halo Reach better, because I love the Halo games, and Halo Reach has one of the best campaigns in the entire series as far as I'm concerned. It's also a really good, really satisfying first-person shooter. But really, when I sat down and thought about it, I think maybe of the games that I've reviewed, the one that I am most taken with and that I've gone back to the most is actually Activision's Beam Rider for the Atari 2600, which comparatively looks like a much simpler game, and You know, you might think, why would you say that instead of Halo Reach or anything else? Beam Rider is a really, really good, simple action arcade style game, and I particularly like the Atari 2600 version. I did actually, since taking delivery of my ZX Spectrum Next, check out the Spectrum version of Beam Rider, thinking, oh, maybe it would be like a more impressive thing. And I was actually quite surprised at how much more personality the Atari 2600 version of Beam Rider has. And there is just something about that, besides the fact that it's just a really fun game, and it doesn't have that quality that a lot of 2600 games, where, you know, after a very short while I find that I can't really play them anymore. Beam Rider is completely different. It's a really good workout. It really does take a lot of skill to play, and that one all day long. I am still playing Beam Rider on my coffee breaks at home even now. So, you know, I think that's the one probably that I like the most out of everything that I've reviewed so far. But ask me the same question in a couple of years and maybe we'll get a different answer. As far as the mini consoles are concerned, I actually think that's a more interesting question, because some people are very, very much into this whole market that has sprung up for these mini replica consoles, and I don't personally think there's much steam left in that market. I think there is still a lot of potential in that market that hasn't been realised. For example, there are certain consoles that haven't had that treatment, like the Sega Master System. But at the same time, I don't think there's very much further that anyone can go with that kind of thing. I do still see people talking about the possibility of an N64 Mini, or a GameCube Mini, or a Sega Dreamcast Mini. And those are all really nice ideas. I think if you could have one of those with a nice selection of preloaded games, then yeah, who wouldn't want them? Because like all of those consoles have fan bases. I don't care what anyone says, they all have great games. But really, things are at a tipping point. Mini consoles are basically reliant on quality emulation to deliver a really satisfying experience. And emulation for consoles like the N64, the Sega Saturn, the Sega Dreamcast, is just not where it needs to be to produce a satisfactory product. Just look at the mess Sony made of the PlayStation Classic, and that's a system that debatably should be workable in that format. There are quite a few details of the whole mini console craze that I'm not particularly enamoured with, even though I think they are a really great idea. Something that I personally found interesting about the Sega Mega Drive Mini was the fact that the pack-in controllers that came with that, even though you got two of them, they really weren't very good, and I'm surprised that they didn't attract more criticism when the Mega Drive Mini was being reviewed. My issue with them is I find them far too over-responsive, and the D-pads feel very loose, and I find some of the games on there very hard to control with them. Details like that really irk me, because it feels like all of the effort has gone into the quality of the emulation and the base unit, the actual mini console itself, and then the controller, the thing that is basically the bridge between you, the player, and the game, seems sometimes to be a bit of an afterthought. I noticed even the Super Nintendo Classic, the controller, the D-pad on that, is not really up to producing some of the moves in Street Fighter 2, which it just seems strange to me. I would expect a little bit more effort to go into those things. Personally, I think that what we're going to see now is a bit of a slowing down of the whole mini console craze. I think maybe the PC Engine Mini, or TurboGrafx Mini, or whatever you want to call it, I think that is going to really signify the winding down of that, because we've actually got more interesting things going on with technology, like FPGA technology, which is the kind of thing you've got being employed in things like the ZX Spectrum Next and the Mega 64, the new Commodore 64 platform that's being developed that isn't the horrible retro games C64 mini thing, that one. I think that's going to be very interesting, because that is going to open the door to basically more authentic retro systems. I'm keeping an eye with some interest on things like the Nintendo 64 clone console that Hyperkin are making, which I'm fairly certain is not going to be an accurate N64 experience for people that pick it up. If they do actually go down the FPGA route with that console, I think that could be genuinely excellent. But again, it needs to be done with an eye on the fine details. Retro gaming enthusiasts can be very, very picky and very exacting in their expectations about these things, and I think it takes that kind of technology to really make them work. Mike Woods asks, in light of the upcoming Brexit fiasco, how much wood will a woodchuck be able to chuck in a dystopian apocalypse? My response to that would be, ask not how much wood a woodchucker would chuck in a dystopian apocalypse. Instead, ask yourself, how much wood would you chuck on the basis of his quality? Until the bell tolls for thee. Obviously Terry asks, what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow? I'm afraid I need a bit more data on that. I mean, are we talking African or European swallows? Rose-Tinted Spectrum asks, if you could wipe your memory of a gaming experience to replay it all over again, what would you choose? I notice people are asking these kind of questions a lot more on social media, and I think it's a really good one, because a lot of video games do lose something when you go back to replay them. For me, I would say if there's a game that I could go back and play from fresh for the first time all over again, with no knowledge of what was going to happen, it would probably be Horizon Zero Dawn for the PlayStation 4. I remember when I played that for the first time, I couldn't spend enough time on that game. It was a really nice one to escape into, and I really like the way the story and the characters develop in that. I'd definitely go back and play that one from scratch if I could, but I'd probably do that with the complete edition, because I think if you play it without that, you do miss out on a lot of really cool stuff. Anyway, that's all the questions I've got for this time. Thanks everyone who sent them in, and not again.
Greetings, human weakling. It is I, your tannin-based tetrarch, the T Eternal. Once again I deign to commune with you from the place between spaces, on this inglorious occasion, marking the lowly achievement of your pathetic YouTube channel of somehow managing to con 700 people into watching it. To be honest, I've got much better things to do right now than to be sending video missives across time and space. But when I think of the sheer volume of tea those 700 fine men and women must have consumed during the span of their lifetimes, I feel moved inwardly to...
Have you been panic buying?
Not especially. Why do you ask?
You knock that off right now. Honestly, it's because of people like you that NHS workers can't get hold of fruit and veg when they go shopping. People have lost their minds.
Well, at least I'm not the one finishing his Q&A video by talking to a cup of tea.